Wonderful Distractions brings to you the third and the final episode from William Hope Hodgson's The Horse of the Invisible. In the previous two episodes, we have seen the ghost finder Karnaki being hired by a very aristocratic family in Britain to help their daughter, who is the firstborn in the family, from a haunted century-and-a-half-old curse. Karnaki travels to their mansion, but he is met with an invisible horse that is trying to stalk the very lady that he is trying to save. Can Karnaki save the innocent girl? To know the answer, please, dear listeners, listen to the final episode of The Horse of the Invisible by William Hope Hodgson. This, of course, I told him, was nothing but nerves. It made me feel very anxious, for I have seen too much not to know that under such circumstances a premonitory conviction of impending danger is not necessarily to be put down entirely to nerves. In fact, Beaumont was so simply and earnestly convinced that the night would bring some extraordinary manifestation that I got Parsket to rig up a long cord from the wear of the butler's bell to come along the passage handy. To the butler himself I gave directions not to undress and to give the same order to two of the footmen. If I rang, he was to come instantly with the footmen carrying lanterns, and the lanterns were to be kept ready lit all night. For any reason, the bell did not ring and I blew my whistle. He was to take that as a signal in the place of the bell. After I had arranged all the minor details, I drew a pentacle about Beaumont and warned him very particularly to stay within it, whatever happened. And when this was done, there was nothing to do but wait and pray that the night would go as quietly as the night before. We scarcely talked it all, and by about 1 a.m. we were all very tense and nervous, so that at last Parsket got up and began to walk up and down the corridor to steady himself a bit. Presently, I slipped off my pumps and joined him, and we walked up and down, whispering occasionally for something over an hour, until, in turning, I caught my foot in the bell cord and went down on my face, but without hurting myself or making a noise. When I got up, Parsket nudged me. "Did you notice that the bell never rang?" he whispered. "Jove," I said, "you were right." "Wait a minute," he answered. "Till bet it's only a kink somewhere in the cord." He left his gun and slipped along the passage, and taking the top lamp, tiptoed away into the house, carrying Beaumont's revolver ready in his right hand. He was a plucky chap, I remember thinking then and again later. Just then, Beaumont motioned to me for absolute quiet. Directly afterward, I heard the thing for which I listened, the sound of a horse galloping out in the night. I think that I may say I fairly shivered. The sound died away and left a horrible, desolate, weary feeling in the air. I put my hand out to the bell cord, hoping Parsket had got it clear. Then I waited, glancing before and behind. Perhaps 2 minutes passed, full of what seemed like an almost unearthly quiet. And then, Suddenly, down the corridor, at the lighted end, there sounded the clumping of a great hoof, and instantly the lamp was thrown with a tremendous crash, and we were in the dark. I tugged hard on the cord and blew the whistle. Then I raised my snapshot and fired the flashlight. The corridor blazed into brilliant light, but there was nothing, and then the darkness felt like thunder. I heard the captain at the bedroom door and shouted to him to bring out a lamp, quick! But instead, something started to kick the door, and I heard the captain shouting within the bedroom, and then the screaming of the woman. I had a sudden horrible fear that the monster had got into the bedroom, but in the same instant, from up the corridor, that came abruptly the vile, gobbling gnawing that we had heard in the park and the cellar. I blew the whistle again and groped blindly for the bell cord, shouting to Beaumont to stay in the pentacle, whatever happened. I yelled again to the captain to bring out a lamp, and there came a smashing sound against the bedroom door. Then I had my matches in my hand to get some light before that incredible, unseen monster was upon us. The match scraped on the box and flared up duly, and in the same instant I heard a faint sound behind me. I whipped round in a kind of mad terror and saw something in the light of the match. A monstrous horse head close to Beaumont. "Look out, Beaumont," I shouted in a sort of scream. "It's behind you." The match went out abruptly, and instantly there came the huge bang of baskets, double barrel, both barrels at once, fired evidently single-handed by Beaumont close to my ear. As it seemed, I caught a momentary glimpse of the great head in the flash and of an enormous hoop, amid the belch of fire and smoke seeming to be descending upon Beaumont. In the same instant, I fired 3 chambers of my revolver. There was the sound of a dull blow, and then that horrible, gobbling neigh broke out close to me. I fired twice at the sound. Immediately afterwards, something struck me, and I was knocked backward. I got onto my knees and shouted for help at the top of my voice. "Help! Help! Someone!" I heard the woman screaming behind the closed door of the bedroom, and was duly aware that the door was being smashed from the inside. And directly afterward I knew that Beaumont was struggling with some hideous thing near to me. For an instant I held back, stupidly, paralyzed with funk, and then, blindly and in a sort of rigid chill of goose flesh, I went to help him. Shouting his name, I can tell you, I was nearly sick with the naked fear I had on me. There came a little choking scream out of the darkness, and at that I jumped forward into the dark. I gripped a vast furry ear, then something struck me another great blow, knocking me sick. I hid back, weak and blind, and gripped with my other hand at the incredible thing. Abruptly, I was dimly aware of a tremendous crash behind me, and a great burst of light. There were other lights in the passage, and a noise of feet and shouting. My hand grips were torn from the thing they held. I shut my eyes stupidly and heard a loud yell above me, and then a heavy blow, like a butcher chopping meat, and then something fell upon me. I was helped to my knees by the captain and the butler. On the floor lay an enormous horse head, out of which protruded a man's trunk and legs. On the wrists were fixed great hoops. It was the monster. The captain cut something with the sword that he held in his hand and stopped and lifted up the mask, for that is what it was. I saw the face then of the man who had worn it. It was Basket. He had a bad wound across the forehead where the captain's sword had hit through the mask. I looked bewilderingly from him to Beaumont, who was sitting up, leaning against the wall of the corridor. Then I stared at Paskett again. "By Jove!" I said at last, and then I was quiet, for I was so ashamed for the man. You can understand, can't you? And he was opening his eyes, and I had grown so to like him. And then, just as Paskett was getting back his wits and looking from one to the other of us and beginning to remember, there happened a strange and incredible thing. Far from the end of the corridor, there sounded suddenly the champing of a great hoof. I looked that way and then instantly at Paskett and saw a horrible fear in his faces and eyes. He wrenched himself round weakly and stared in mad terror up the corridor to where the sound had been, and the rest of us stared in a frozen group. I remember vaguely half sobs and whisper from Miss Hisgins' bedroom, all the while that I stared frightenedly up the corridor. The silence lasted several seconds, and then abruptly there came again the clumping of the great hoof away at the end of the corridor, and immediately afterward the clunk, 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 clunk of mighty hoofs coming down the passage towards us. Even then, most of us thought it was some mechanism of Paskett still at work, and we were in the queerest mixture of fright and doubt. I think everyone looked at Paskett, and suddenly the captain shouted out, "Stop this damned fooling at once! Haven't you done enough?" For my part, I was now frightened, for I had a sense that there was something horrible and wrong, and then Paskett managed to gasp out, "It's not me! My God! It's not me! My God! It's not me!" And then, it seemed to come home to everyone in an instant that there was really some dreadful thing coming down the passage. There was a mad rush to get away, and even old Captain Hisgins gave back with the butler and the footman. Beaumont fainted outright, as I found afterward, for he had been badly mauled. I just flattened back against the wall, kneeling as I was, too stupid and dazed even to run. And almost in the same instant, the ponderous hoof falls sounded close to me, and seeming to shake the solid floor as they passed. Abruptly, the great sound ceased, and I knew in a sort of sick fashion that the thing had halted opposite to the door of the girl's bedroom. And then I was aware that Paskett was standing, rocking in the doorway with his arms spread across, so as to fill the doorway with his body. Paskett was extraordinarily pale, and the blood was running down his face from the wound in his forehead. Then I noticed that he seemed to be looking at something in the passage with a peculiar, desperate, fixed, incredibly masterful gaze. And there was really nothing to be seen, and suddenly the clunk, 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 clunk recommenced and passed onward down the passage. In the same moment, Paskett pitched forward out of the doorway on his face. There was shouts from the huddle of men down the passage, and the two footmen and the butler simply ran, carrying their lanterns, but the captain went against the side wall with his back and put the lamp he was carrying over his head. The dull tread of the horse went past him and left him unharmed, and I heard the monstrous hoof falls going away and away through the quiet halls, and after that a dead silence. Then the captain moved and came towards us, very slow and shaky, and with an extraordinarily grey face. I crept toward Paskett, and the captain came to help me. We turned him over, and I knew in a moment that he was dead. But you can imagine what a feeling it sent through me. I looked at the captain, and suddenly he said, That. and I thought he was trying to tell me that Basket had stood between his daughter and whatever it was that had gone down the passage. I stood up and stared him, though I was not very steady myself. And suddenly his face began to work, and he went down onto his knees by Basket and cried like some shaken child. Then the woman came out of the doorway of the bedroom and turned away and left him to them, whilst I over to Beaumont. That is practically the whole story, and the only thing there is left to me is try to explain some of the puzzling parts, here and there. Perhaps you have seen that Basket was in love with Miss Hisgins, and this fact is the key to a great deal that was extraordinary. He was doubtless responsible for some portions of the haunting. In fact, I think for nearly everything. But I can prove nothing, and what I have to tell you is chiefly the result of deduction. In the first place, it is obvious that Basket's intention was to frighten Beaumont away. And when he found that he could not do this, I think he grew so desperate that he really intended to kill him. I hate to say this, but the facts force me to think so. I am quite certain that it was Basket who broke Beaumont's arm. He knew all the details of the so-called horse legend and got the idea to work upon the old story for his own end. He evidently had some more method of slipping in and out of the house, probably through one of the many French windows, or possibly he had a key to one or two of the garden doors, and when he was supposed to be away, he was really coming down on the quiet and hiding somewhere in the neighborhood. The incident of the kiss in the dark hall I put down to sheer nervous imaginings on the part of Beaumont and Mrs. Hisgins. Yet I must say that the sound of the horse outside of the front door is a little difficult to explain away. But I'm still inclined to keep my first idea on this point, that there was nothing really unnatural about it. The flute sounds in the billiard room and down the passage were done by Basket, from the floor below, by bumping up against the panelled ceiling with a block of wood tied to one of the window hooks. I proved this by an examination which showed the dents in the woodwork. The sounds of the horse galloping round the house was possibly made also by Basket, who must have had a horse tied up in the plantation nearby, unless indeed he made the sound himself, but I do not see how he could have gone fast enough to produce the illusion. In any case, I don't feel perfect certainly on this point. I failed to find any hook marks, as you remember. The gobbling neighing in the park was a ventriloquial achievement on the part of Basket, and the attack out there on Beaumont was also by him. So that when I thought he was in his bedroom, he must have been outside all the time and joined me after I ran out of the front door. This is almost probable. I mean that Basket was the cause, for if it had been something more serious, he would certainly have given up his foolishness, knowing that there was no longer any need for it. I cannot imagine how he escaped being shot, both then and in his last mad action of which I have just told you. He was enormously without fear of any kind for himself, as you can see. The time when Basket was with us, when we thought we heard the horse galloping around the house, he must have been deceived. No one was very sure, except of course Basket, who naturally encouraged the belief. The neighing in the cellar is where I consider there came the first suspicion into Basket's mind that there was now something more at work than his sham haunting. The neighing was done by him in the same way that he did it in the park, but when I remember how ghastly he looked, I feel sure that the sounds must have had some infernal quality added to them which frightened the man himself. Yet later he would persuade himself that he had been getting fanciful. Of course, I must not forget that the effect upon Mrs. Hisgins must have made him feel pretty miserable. Then, about the clergyman being called away, we found afterward that it was a bogus errand, or rather call, and it is apparent that Basket was at the bottom of this, so as to get a few more hours in which to achieve this his end, and what that was, a very little imagination will show you. for he had found that Beaumont would not be frightened away. I hate to think this, but I am bound to. Anyway, it is obvious that the man was temporarily a bit of his normal balance, loves to acquire disease. Then there is no doubt at all but that basket left the cord to the butler's bell hitched somewhere so as to give him an excuse to slip away naturally to clear it. This also gave him the opportunity to remove one of the passage lamps. Then he had only to smash the other and the passage was in utter darkness for him to make the attempt on Beaumont. In the same way, it was he who locked the door of the bedroom and took the key. It was in his pocket. This prevented the captain from bringing a light and coming to the rescue. Captain Hisgins broke down the door with heavy fender curb, and it was his smashing the door that sounded so confusing and frightening in the darkness of the passage. The photograph of the monstrous hoof of Mrs. Hisgins in the cellar is one of the things that I am less sure about. It might have been faked by Faskett while I was out of the room, and this would have been easy enough to anyone who knew how. But it does not look like a fake. There is as much evidence of probability that it was faked as against, and the thing is too vague for an examination to help to a definite decision, so that I will express no opinion one way or the other. It is certainly a horrible photograph. And now I come to the last dreadful thing. There is been no further manifestation of anything abnormal, so that there is an extraordinary uncertainty in my conclusions. If we had not heard those last sounds, and if Faskett had not shown that enormous sense of fear, the whole of this case could be explained in the way in which I have shown. And in fact, as you have seen, I am of the opinion that almost all of it can be cleared up, but I see no way of going past the thing we heard at the last and the fear that Faskett showed. His death, no, that proves nothing. As the inquest, it was described somewhat unethically as due to heart spasm. This is normal enough and leaves us quite in the dark as to whether he died because he stood between the girl and some incredible thing of monstrosity. The look on Faskett's face and the thing he called out when he heard the great hood sounds coming down the passage seemed to show that he had the sudden realization of what before them may have been nothing more than a horrible suspicion. And his fear and appreciation of some tremendous danger approaching was probably more keenly real even than mine. And then he did the one fine great thing. And the cause? I said, what caused it? Karnaki shook his head. God knows, he answered with a peculiar, sincere reverence. If that thing was what it seemed to be, one might suggest an explanation which would not offend one's reason, but which may be utterly wrong. Yet I have thought through it would take a long lecture on thought induction to get you to appreciate my reasons. If Faskett had produced what I might term a kind of induced haunting, kind of induced simulation of his mental conceptions to his desperate thoughts and broodings, it is impossible to make it clearer in a few words. But the old story? I said, why may not there have been something in that? There may have been something in it, said Karnaki, but I do not think it had anything to do with this. I have not clearly thought out my reasons yet, but later I may be able to tell you why I think so. And the marriage and the cellar, was there anything found there? Asked Taylor. Yes, the marriage was performed that day in spite of the tragedy. Karnaki told us. It was the wisest thing to do, considering the things that I cannot explain. Yes, I had the floor of that big cellar up, for I had a feeling I might find something there to give me some light, but there was nothing. You know, the whole thing is tremendous and extraordinary. I shall never forget the look on Faskett's face. And afterward, the disgusting sounds of those great hoops going away through the quiet house. Carnegie stood up. Out you go, he said in friendly fashion, using the recognized formula. And we went presently out into the quiet of the embankment, and so to our homes. The story, The Horse of the Invisible, comes to an end. So, ultimately, Karnaki could not explain any supernatural or phantom being, but there was this case of human emotion, in this case, the love of a rejected man, which ultimately turned into a phantom that haunted the whole family. However, was there nothing supernatural? Was there only Basket who was doing all these things? Was there nothing supernatural there? Like Karnaki, we can only say, only God knows. Thank you. Good night for all my lovely listeners. Next week, Wonderful Distractions will bring you another engrossing story. Till then, good night, goodbye. Thank you.